Get us started here. Thanks for those of you that are have already joined us. I'm sure we'll have some more pop on in a little bit. Um, when I start these again, this is our second one that we've done. So if you don't know, I'm bringing in our past speakers from last year and kind of getting updates, letting you guys ask questions, and kind of reconnecting them with these people we have access. And again, if you guys have questions, we can always get you guys more in touch with them if you're not asking them today. And I also just want you guys to know before we get started, so I don't say this for the end, for the rest of the month, our next event is going to be our Manatee Lagoon Talk, which will be next week on Tuesday at 4:30. And instead of it being at the shop, we're actually going to the Manatee Lagoon Center, which we'll get a tour. We'll see what's going on with the manatees and their environment over there. And that's in Riviera Beach. So we're excited for that. If you have any questions about it, you can reach out to Kyalami or me at Mimi at the Scuba Club. But that being said, I want to go ahead and start and introduce you guys to Tonya, whose talk last year was absolutely amazing. Sawfish, I have a very special place in my heart for them. And I know we're definitely curious about it. We're coming up on what we call our sawfish season, just because there's more sightings of them from divers. As we move into the end of January, the beginning of February, we go to some sites that are more north that the sawfish end up being around. And so we have more sightings of them, which develops more questions, but also like all of our animals, we always want to know more so we can do more and make sure we're protecting them and learning the most information we can about them. So that being said, I'm going to let Tonya go ahead and take over and start. And you guys feel free to ask any questions throughout, and we'll make sure those get answered in between. So that being said, go ahead, Tonya, and thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mimi. Can everybody hear me okay?
You sound great.
Hopefully. Yes. Great. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for joining me again. I can't see y'all on the camera, but I was going to ask how many of y'all came to my talk. I think it was in February earlier this year. Did anybody see my in-person presentation?
Oh, we got a bunch of yeses on the side. Toby and Agnes was there. Um, I know Sid and me were there. It was awesome.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go over a little background and for those of you that weren't there, just a little bit to catch you up. And then I'm going to provide an update from what I presented earlier this year to y'all. Um, so just a little background on me. I've been researching sharks, rays, and sawfish now for I'm on my 24th year of working with sawfish. The three main places I've worked are Mote Marine Lab here in Sarasota, Texas Parks and Wildlife, which is where I'm from. And then in 2010, I started my own nonprofit organization, Havenworth Coastal Conservation. And I do still hear a lot of shark and ray research in the Tampa Bay area. But what we're here to talk about tonight is the stuff that I do with sawfish, both the research and the policy side of this endangered species. I am the smalltooth sawfish recovery implementation team leader. That's an organization formed by NOAA Fisheries when the smalltooth sawfish was listed as an endangered species. They brought together a bunch of experts, and we're tasked with ensuring we save the remaining sawfish, but then ultimately recover them. That's our goal, is to recover them and get them off the endangered species list. And I also do sawfish research in the Tampa Bay area. I'm kind of at the northern extent of where we get them regularly, but I've caught one adult and five newborns in the Tampa Bay area in all this time. But it's more than nothing, and they've all been in the last few years, so that's exciting. And then I'm in charge for all the outreach and education, things like this that we do for sawfish in the United States. So just a little recap, sawfish are a very large, distinctive type of ray. They are a ray because the gill slits are on the underside of their body. Sharks have their gill slits on the side of their body. There's a similar species called a saw shark, but it, instead of having the gills on the underside, has the gills on the side of their body. It's a much smaller animal and a deeper water animal. But sawfish, kind of easy to see how they get their name. They have this elongated, we call it a rostrum, or commonly referred to as a saw. There are 5 species of sawfish found around the world, and in the United States, we used to have 2 species historically that both were considered abundant and common in U.S. waters. We have unfortunately lost the large tooth sawfish. It's been many decades since we've had a confirmed report of that species, and so now we focus all of our efforts on the small tooth sawfish. And now I'm going to show you a little video that kind of goes through why they're endangered and what we're doing to help them.
Sawfish are majestic marine animals that were once found in coastal waters of the United States from Texas to North Carolina. Unfortunately, decades of mortality in fisheries and the loss of important nursery habitats led to dramatic reductions in both their numbers and range. Now they are generally only found in Florida and most commonly in southwest Florida around Everglades National Park. Sawfish are federally protected as endangered species under the Endangered Species Act and need your help to survive and avoid extinction. It is illegal to target, harm, harass, or handle sawfish in any way. This video will show you how to respect, release, and report sawfish. It demonstrates how to safely and legally interact with sawfish you encounter while diving, snorkeling, or boating, or catch while fishing with hook and line or nets. These guidelines will aid divers and boaters in safely, respectfully, and legally enjoying their encounter with a sawfish. The most important thing to remember when viewing a sawfish is to not disrupt its natural behavior. If a sawfish swims away because of your presence, then you are too close. So, if you are lucky enough to see a sawfish while diving, please keep your distance. Don't chase, feed, or touch any sawfish you encounter while diving. If you come across a sawfish while boating, kayaking, or paddleboarding, keep your distance so you don't disturb the sawfish. Stay far enough away from the sawfish to ensure that you don't run over it. While it is technically illegal to catch a sawfish, captures do occur while fishing for other species. Sawfish are extremely susceptible to entanglement in recreational fishing lines and commercial nets. These guidelines will teach you about quick, safe, and legal release of incidentally caught sawfish. Be aware, mishandling and the purposeful injury or killing of captured sawfish is both illegal and detrimental to the recovery of the population. The number one rule to remember when handling and releasing a sawfish is to leave it in the water at all times. Removing sawfish from the water is a clear violation of the law. Do not lift it out of the water onto your boat or a pier, and do not drag it ashore. This ensures the safety of both the sawfish and the angler. Sawfish are powerful animals that can whip their saw very quickly, causing serious injury to the angler. If you catch a sawfish on hook and line, leave the sawfish, especially the gills, in the water at all times. Only if it can be done safely and with the sawfish in the water, untangle any fishing line wrapped around the rostrum or saw. You may need to cut the line along the saw with scissors or a knife to be able to free the line from the sawfish. Always cut the line as close to the hook as is safely possible. If you catch a sawfish in a net, leave the sawfish, especially the gills, in the water at all times. Starting at the tail and working towards the head, untangle the net, removing as much of it as is safely possible. You may need to cut the net with scissors or a knife to free the sawfish. Any sawfish caught while fishing must be released as quickly as possible. Don't use a gaff or ropes to secure or handle a sawfish, as this may cause injury to the animal and delays the release. It is illegal to remove a sawfish's rostrum. Sawfish use their rostrum for detecting and catching food, so removing the rostrum ultimately leads to starvation. If you catch or see a sawfish, note its estimated total length and the date, time, and your location with GPS coordinates if available. Scientists use your shared sawfish encounter data to track recovery of the population and steer research and conservation efforts. The ultimate goal is to recover the United States population of smalltooth sawfish to the point that it no longer needs the protections of the Endangered Species Act. Following these respect, release, report guidelines will help prevent extinction and aid in population rebuilding and ultimately recovery. For more information about sawfish research, management, and conservation in the United States, visit www.sawfishrecovery.org or call 1-844-4-SAWFISH.
Okay, I'm gonna skip through the credits here. Y'all hear me okay? Okay. So like I said, we've been doing field research on sawfish since right before they were listed. So we started in about 2000, 2001, which isn't long when you think about an animal and the research done on it. Us having, almost 20 years of research data isn't much, but we've learned a lot in that time. We know they're born about 2 feet long. They have to be about 7 years old and 11 or 12 feet long before they start reproducing. Their maximum size in the United States is about 16 feet long. We don't know yet how long they live. We're actually working on that. I'll circle back to that in a minute. We don't know how many there are. So we take a little piece of DNA from every sawfish that we catch. We're sending that to our colleague at the Field Museum. If you've ever done like 23andMe to swab your cheek and send it in and find all your relatives, he's doing that for us for sawfish, kind of building a family tree of sawfish for us so we can find out how many are contributing to the population and how many there are out there. They're pregnant for about 12 months. They give birth to about 7 to 14, what we call pups, and they give live birth. Now, a lot of people wonder how on earth they can give birth to live animals with this saw. Well, it's actually covered in what we call a sheath. This is like a fibrous material made out of collagen and keratin, and it covers those teeth while the babies are developing in mom and protects mom during birth. So she's not shredded by all these saws coming out. And then that'll quickly dissolve in a few days so they can use their sawfish for finding food. They feed mostly on fish. So small sawfish will just kind of swim over the bottom and use their saw like a metal detector to find little shrimp, fish, crabs, things like that. Large sawfish will actually swipe their saw at schooling fish, and they'll impale a fish on their saw or they'll stun that fish and then they'll go back and slurp it in whole. They don't have sharp teeth in their mouth. They just have a broad plate of teeth, kind of like our back teeth. So they just suck in their prey hole. And I've got a video of that later that you're going to see them feeding. So I mentioned that the
video
large tooth
you showed
sawfish.
last year was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's
I
the same
love
one
that.
I got in here too. Yeah.
I love that
It's a great
video.
way to end. Yeah.
And then Tonya, last year when you explained kind of how you're doing the testing on the sawfish, kind of like the 21andMe, you guys had
Mhm.
kits for anyone, like maybe some old fishermen had these bills in their house. Maybe you know someone like a friend that does. Are you guys still doing that? Like giving those
We
kits out
are.
when people come across the bill?
Yes.
for them to send in
Yes.
to you. I definitely
Yes.
would mention that. Just we have so many locals and even Florida natives that have been fishing or have these areas. I've seen them in a lot of people's houses growing up. So I would definitely let them know about that.
Yes, we have colleagues at University of Southern Mississippi that are looking at the historic DNA, and now we just have a postdoc coming in with Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, and so he's actually going to compare the historic DNA to the current DNA for us, and we get that historic DNA through those rostra that people kept as trophies or bought as a souvenir. So if you ever see one, yes, we have a kit that we can send you, has all the instructions in there, the permit information. You can take a little sample of it from us and send it in. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's very helpful at us getting at what the historic population looked at before, we started researching them. So the large-tooth sawfish is locally extinct. It's been now 60 something years since we've had a report of that in the United States, and that last report was in Texas. But we were seeing some encouraging signs for the smalltooth sawfish. And two things I always like to point out are the gill net ban, the inshore gill net ban. That wasn't done for sawfish and didn't have anything to do with sawfish, but it definitely took away one of the major sources of mortality that sawfish were experiencing in Florida waters. And the creation and protection and restoration of Everglades National Park is extremely critical for the success of sawfish recovery. I think the only reason we have the small-tooth sawfish left is because of Everglades National Park, where we've lost them from the rest of the country. Everglades National Park is this huge expanse of natural habitat. There's no commercial fishing pressure in there. And so that kind of provided a safe haven for this species when they were kind of being decimated everywhere else. We've done a lot of research on sawfish in the last 2 decades, and we've made a lot of management progress designating critical habitat for nursery areas for small-tooth sawfish where the pups, the newborns are. And a lot more people are becoming aware that we have sawfish in our waters and what to do if they are lucky enough to see one. And I hope that y'all are lucky enough to see one this winter when you go out diving, because they're just amazing, amazing critters to see. And last year when we met, our recovery team, we were kind of cautiously optimistic that all of our trends and our data were showing that the population was at least stable and that we might be seeing some increases in the population at some localized scales, particularly down in Everglades National Park and Charlotte Harbor. And to reiterate that, we have confirmed reports of sawfish in both Mississippi and South Carolina. That's great news that we're getting sawfish out of Florida again in part of their historic range. The one in Mississippi was caught by a fisherman. We have a photograph of it. We know that that was a sawfish. The one in South Carolina was actually a sawfish that our research crew with Florida State University caught down in the Keys, put a tracking device on it, and it was detected up in South Carolina. Really, really promising news that we were seeing these increasing trends and seeing some sawfish outside of Florida again. But then this happened, and I'm sure you've all seen this on the news or read it in the paper. But last winter, we started getting reports of fish and other critters, birds, crabs, horseshoe crabs, just acting really strange. Fish that were swimming in circles, swimming upside down, ramming their heads into the bottom or into seawalls and bridge pylons. Just the really bizarre activity that we were seeing in the species down in the Florida Keys. And flip. Sorry, my next slide has a lot of video in it, so it takes some time to load. There we go. It's going to buffer for a second and then it'll load. On audio. But we started getting these reports of sawfish spinning, acting strange, beaching themselves. Their array, they should be on the bottom. We were getting these videos of sawfish acting erratically. And then we got reports. We got the reports of sawfish beaching themselves, stranding themselves, jumping up on the beach. Oh, this started in January of this year. We were just getting dozens of calls to our hotline of a sawfish on the beach, spinning erratically in shallow waters, or dead on the beach, like some of these pictures. Most of these were in Everglades National Park and the Keys, but we did have one in the Tampa Bay area in June of this year that was spinning and then was found dead the next morning, unfortunately. Um, so this was obviously very concerning to us that there's this endangered species population that is undergoing this mass mortality event. And so NOAA announced on March 27th that we were going to implement this unprecedented effort to attempt to rescue and rehabilitate some of these affected sawfish. This hadn't been done anywhere in the world before. So we were kind of going into this blind, not really knowing what to do. But a lot of partners, seen across the bottom there, stepped up immediately to help with this effort. We had people from aquariums and veterinarians and university personnel, nonprofit personnel, that came to try to help us with this effort. And on April 5th of this year, we rescued an 11-foot male from Cudjoe Key down in the Keys. It was put in temporary storage in the Keys, and then it was moved to the mainland on April 12th. And unfortunately, despite being put in clean water, veterinary care, this sawfish succumbed to this event, and we had to euthanize it on May 2nd. None of this would have been possible without Ripley's Aquariums. They donated their time, their effort, their humongous transport truck that they use for moving animals. They brought that down to the Keys. We were able to put this sawfish in it and move it up to the mainland. So got to give huge credit to them. We couldn't use the existing infrastructure for like manatees and dolphins because sawfish have to be in the water to breathe. So we couldn't just put them in the back of a pickup truck and move them somewhere, or in a trailer. They had to be in a tank with water to be able to breathe. So we're very grateful to Ripley's Aquarium for bringing their transport truck down for us to use for this effort. So there have been hundreds, probably thousands at this point, of water samples, benthic samples, tissue samples from a variety of organisms that are being tested by dozens of people around the world trying to get to what caused this. The water testing indicated that it wasn't low oxygen in the water. The salinity was fine. The pH and the temperature were in normal. You'll recall the summer before that, the Keys had a really hot summer, and it was causing a lot of the corals to bleach. That might be related. We'll find out. They've done water testing for more than 200 chemicals, including pesticides, herbicides, pharmaceuticals. All those were either not detected or were below any biological thresholds. No red tide was found. That's usually the first thing that we always look at in Florida is red tide. But what was found in extremely high numbers, like 10 to 100 times normal levels, is Gambier discus. And this is a dinoflagellate that releases ciguatera toxins into the environment. You may have heard this, that there's some fish that you shouldn't eat because they're high in ciguatera. Those water samples, some of the water samples showed really high levels of Gambier discus in the waters. And so then we started looking for that in the fish tissues, and it was also observed in the fish tissues. We're continuing to do research to figure out, was it the Gambier discus? Was it a combination of Gambier discus and another species? Was it a cocktail of a perfectly wrong event that happened? But even if we knew for 100% certain right now that it was Gambier discus, what we don't know is what it did to the body of the animals to cause the spinning and then to cause the mortality. So we're collecting a lot of tissue samples and sending those off to a lot of people who are looking at that. So specifically for sawfish, We had over 200 reports of affected sawfish, that they were either spinning or beached or acting erratically, swimming with their saw out of the water. We were able to recover over 50 of those, almost 60 now at this point, that we were able to do a full necropsy on. And we're sending samples around the country to experts who are trying to, again, figure out what happened in the body of the sawfish that caused it to spin and then die. Um, so folks with like bonefish, tarpon, trust were able to take pinfish and some other species out of the natural water in the Keys, put them in a holding tank with clean water, and those species would stop spinning. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for our sawfish that we rescued and recovered and had in care for a few weeks. So we need to know what's happening in the body so that hopefully we can figure out some kind of mitigation, something we can inject them with in the wild, or what we need to do if we rescue them again, if this happens again. Hopefully it doesn't. Um, so we're sending brains to University of North Carolina, Dr. Kara Yopak. She's going to do CT scans on both the affected sawfish and some that we had from before the event to see if there's any differences there. Same with the blood. Dr. Jen Whipples at Ripley's Aquarium is looking at blood from wild sawfish from before the event, from sawfish that are in human care in aquariums, and from blood that we collected from the sawfish that we collected that were mortalities. And Dr. Allison Robertson at University of South Alabama, Dolphin Island Sea Lab, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Fish and Health Group are looking at tissues, livers, other organs to try to figure out what is happening in this. Again, that's to hopefully try to determine the cause and the physiological effects to the sawfish so we can identify any treatments that we can give them in the wild, or if we rescue and rehab them again in the future. So I mentioned we can't use the existing infrastructure in the Keys for manatees and dolphins and other species because sawfish have to be in water to be able to breathe. So we're looking at buying a hauling trailer. Again, these animals get up to 16 feet. This one in the picture, can't use that one. Sawfish wouldn't fit in there. But we're looking to acquire our own hauling trailer for sawfish, both live sawfish and any that may pass away that we're taking to necropsy. We're identifying a lot of quarantine tanks. Again, when this happened earlier this year, we had not done this before, so we were just kind of calling people, and whoever was volunteering to help, we were getting anybody that had a tank that we could put a sawfish in involved. And so now we're working on standard operating procedures and signing partner agreements with people, acquiring long-term funding. Again, all this goes in the hopes that we don't ever have to do this again, but if we do, we'll be better prepared this time. So the cause of the event is not yet definitively identified, but we're continuing research on water, sand, seagrass samples, and tissues from all kinds of species of affected animals. But particularly for sawfish, given their limited population size, this mass mortality event could really impact the recovery potential of this species, and that has us very concerned. I mentioned we got a couple hundred reports of affected sawfish, and that's what we know right now are the number of adult sawfish that are contributing to the population. And because all the ones that died were adults and large juveniles, we are really concerned about this population's ability to reproduce and remain viable. I have to acknowledge everybody in our sawfish recovery team. I mentioned that I'm the team leader for the smalltooth sawfish recovery implementation team. Everybody really stepped up and dropped everything that they were doing this spring for us to tackle this event. We didn't know what we were doing, but everybody really stepped up. And I particularly have to thank Adam Brame. He is the NOAA Fisheries Sawfish Recovery Coordinator that pulled all this together, got an emergency permit for us to be able to do this, was herding all the cats and volunteers of people and bringing in partners to help us with this. And Greg Polakis, who is the head of the Sawfish Research Program for FWC, him and his entire crew really bore the brunt of this on the field in the Keys, responding to these reports of spinning sawfish, responding to reports of dead sawfish, and hauling their carcasses back up to Charlotte Harbor for us to be able to do the necropsies on them. So their team really had quite an emotional spring, unfortunately. Um, because this was an unprecedented event, we didn't have money to do any of this, to pay for people to get down there, to house them, to feed them. So we put out an emergency call for funding, and both Brevard Zoo and SeaWorld Conservation Fund stepped up immediately, as well as an anonymous foundation to give us some funds to be able to tackle this. So couldn't have done it without them. Thank you for that. And a lot of members of the public donated to us as well. So we were able to raise the funds not only to get through this spring, but start building our infrastructure and prepare for this if this happens again. So small-tooth sawfish are still at risk, potentially even more now after this mass mortality event earlier this year, and they still need protections of the ESA. Prior to this event, we were expecting that the population could recover, but it was going to take several decades just because of the low numbers we have. We're working on that, trying to figure out what kind of a hit the population took from losing this many animals out of the population. So we're still working on that, but they still need protections of the ESA, and I'm still optimistic that we will eventually recover them. Maybe not in my lifetime anymore. I said that before this year, but I think we're going to be able to recover them. So here's Mimi's favorite video of a sawfish feeding. So this shows you the two ways that sawfish use their rostrum, that staw, to find food. Again, they're raised, so their mouth is on the underside, but small sawfish will pin fish down on the floor like that one did. Large sawfish will swipe at a fish like that one and stun or impale a fish and then go in and just like here, just suck it in whole into their mouth, slurp it in. I'll let it play one more time for Mimi.
Appreciate
It is a great video.
that.
They're just so beautiful. I know I'm biased, but I mean, come on, they're just so beautiful.
Yeah, I think the
Okay,
coolest.
so that's my up.
I have a
Go
question
ahead.
when they're feeding like that. So I know they're using their bills to kind of wear or pin down those fish. But when I've even personally seen them, it seems like they're mixing up the bottom on purpose. Do they do that to like
They
confuse
do.
prey or animals as well? Because it feels like they're using like a magic trick and then like they're there,
Yep.
causing some chaos and then gone.
Yes, we've seen a couple videos of that from divers that encountered that, and there's two possibilities. Either there might be a stingray buried down there or something that they're trying to find to feed on, or it could be that they're trying to cause the mud cloud to disorient all the fish and then go swipe them. So the entire underside of the sawfish rostrum, the saw, has these electrosensory pores, just like the snout of a shark. So they can use that like a metal detector. They can sense when things are swimming by them. So it's possible that the fish and swipe at them as well. So yeah, it's pretty cool to see.
And then, Tonya, some other questions I know that have just come up, and it's more from being on the boat and talking about them. Um, so we see them out in the ocean, but they're also in the mangroves and in the river. So what makes them kind of lean one way or the other more towards that fresh water versus salt water?
That's a great question. So when they're born, they're about 2 feet long when they're born, and they're born in brackish or fresh water. So we get them newborns. If any of you have been to Flamingo and Everglades, one side's the salt water, the Florida Bay side. The Coot Bay side is fresh water or very low salinity water. And so the newborns are actually in this low salinity water. And as they grow, they'll move down further into the estuary. When they're, 6 to 8 feet, they're going to be at the estuaries around the passes. And then when they get to like 10 feet or so, then they'll venture out into the Gulf of Mexico. And adults are Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, sorry. So the adults are mainly in near shore areas. We don't get them out in the middle of Gulf of Mexico. They don't swim between here and the Bahamas, for example. They are still a coastal animal that stay on the shelf. But they kind of partition their habitat use as they're growing bigger, from saltwater to then venturing out into the full strength seawater.
Awesome. Yeah, I've actually, before I started diving, I would see him at boat ramps a lot. Like the two I
Mhm.
saw in my life was at boat ramps, which I found interesting as well. I'm like, what are they doing there?
That's
Uh,
very common because they're in shallow water. So one of the things that the newborn pups really like is shallow water, like ankle deep water or shallower. And that's probably because there's baby bull sharks and other predators that are swimming by. So a lot of times we'll also see baby sawfish resting up among the red mangrove prop roots in that system where predators can't get in. And as the tide falls down, sawfish will swim back and forth in that very shallow water that's only a few inches deep, waiting for the tide to come back up so that they can go into those red mangrove prop roots again and rest and feed. So yes, boat ramps is also one of their favorite places to be because it's shallow and it gets them out of the deeper water where there are predators.
and if you guys haven't, I'll ask Grace, who does our social media. She actually has a awesome award-winning photo from this last year in shallow mangrove water where it's a younger sawfish and it's an awesome photo, half in the water,
Okay.
half out. So I'll ask her if she can post it for you guys in the group so you guys can see that again.
Okay.
But it's an awesome photo because it's right here in the area. So I would love for you guys to be able to see that too.
Yes. It is a beautiful, gorgeous photo. Yes.
She did good. She did great.
You did.
Um, so also talking about the areas they hang out with, I know me and you discussed this a lot last year, and it's the question on our divers' minds. Which essentially your last year or your answer last year was I don't know. But
Right.
our divers do wonder why we see them in this season, why they come out. We
Mhm.
see them in groups a lot when we do see them
Mhm.
in this January and February. I know you had mentioned to me maybe it was resting after mating, and I know you're saying you don't know, but can you touch on what you don't know?
Yes. Yes, we don't know why they congregate, is the short answer. But generally when a species congregates in a reason in an area, it's really for three reasons. They're either feeding, they're mating, or they're resting after mating. Now, the videos we've seen of divers from these aggregations, they don't appear to have just recently mated. So, for example, in Florida Bay, in northern Florida Bay, we get videos and photos, and we've caught big sawfish in that area, and it's very clear that they have recently mated. I won't go into the gory details of how we know that, but it's rough. And the animals tend to have rostrum stripes along their side and they're bloody and they don't look very good after they've mated because it's a rough and tumble business for that to happen. And the videos we've seen of the sawfish congregations over on your coast, they don't exhibit that. They're not, it's not that they're rough. So we think that it could be that they're mating in Everglades National Park and then they're going over there to rest. There's also a lot of food over there, so it could be a food corridor that they're following something, um, or something we haven't thought about yet. But so yeah, the same answer is we don't know why they're congregating there yet. We are putting a lot of tracking devices in them and on them. All of the adult sawfish we catch, we draw blood from. And University of North Florida is looking at the hormone levels of the blood. So if we catch an animal in, let's say, May, and he comes back and he says, "Oh my gosh, the reproductive hormones are through the roof," or if we get one over there and there's no level of reproductive hormones, that will also try to give us a hint at why they're aggregating over there. But for example, like a decade ago, there was a big aggregation of lemon sharks over on that coast, and nobody ever really figured out why. They were just laying on the bottom, didn't appear to be mating. weren't actively feeding, at least when the divers were there. Now they could be actively feeding at night when divers aren't there. Um, and then that aggregation kind of dissipated and isn't there anymore. So we're still trying to get to that, but I think they're probably resting after mating or giving birth
Yeah,
and
I know
feeding.
I love to hear when people see them, kind of what they are doing in the past. I've always seen them resting, but last year when I came up on one, it was the first time I kind of like the sandstorm I mentioned. I just was going through a sandstorm and I was like, I sense there's something big under me. And so in that case, I think it was feeding their schools of fish and
Mhm,
little biz. So it'll be interesting to, keep
mhm.
on taking account what you guys do see out there if
Yep.
you see one and what it's doing. I know I would appreciate that info as I try to
Mhm.
piece it together myself, but I know Tonya, I'm sure may be interested as well,
Oh yeah.
maybe.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, and there's only a handful of us doing research on sawfish, but there's hundreds of divers and fishermen that are out there every day. So every report that we get from the public helps us build this picture of what sawfish are doing, where they are at certain times. And like I said, the videos that we've seen from the divers, there's another one of a sawfish swimming straight up the water column, thrashing at a bait ball. And it's a gorgeous video. We're like, oh my gosh, okay, that's incredible. So, we are able to learn from the experiences that y'all have and get more information that way as well.
yeah, so like I said, we will be usually diving in a similar area they are in the last week of January and February. So you guys will see us in those locations then and can sign up for those dives. But like Tonya said, like they may be resting. So I think we're really lucky that we have this education and we continue to look for it. So we're not just going into these dives blindly. We're doing
Mm-hmm.
it in in a thoughtful way, so realizing
Hmm.
that they may be needing that rest and to keep our distance. And I think we're really lucky that we have Tonya to
Hmm.
remind us of these practices for an animal that is so endangered too, and just how we have to act and the right way to do that around them. And then Tonya, you also mentioned the tracking. So I know
Hmm.
you're an angler yourself and you guys are doing it that way. How is that tracking working for you guys? We talked to for our ASC, our shark girls, about a lot of
Yep.
tracking. I know they're tracking our groupers, which
Yep.
we missed that because of the hurricane, but Angela may come back around during the end of our series and talk about their groupers and tracking. So I'd love for you to touch on that just so we can kind of compare with what we've
Right.
heard for other people
We're probably
doing
using
similar
the
stuff.
probably using the same technology that ASC is using now. That's pretty much what all of us are using for any species. But when we started with sawfish, and here's a picture of me when I was just a little baby starting on sawfish, we were using these satellite tracking tags, and these are similar to what they'll put on a turtle shell when they release a rehab turtle. They'll put a satellite tracking device on it. Um, these are very expensive. They're like $3,000 or $5,000 each, depending on what you want it to do. So we were putting those on sawfish, and we quickly discovered that those did not work for sawfish. So this satellite antenna has to break the surface of the water to be able to communicate with the satellites. And because sawfish are a type of ray, they sit on the bottom most of the time, and that antenna never pinged for us. So we stopped using that, and we've gone to internal transmitters and acoustic receivers. So every sawfish that we catch, in the field, we do a quick surgery on them to implant a transmitter in them. On newborns, these transmitters last about 3 to 5 years. On adults, we can use bigger ones, and so those will last for about 10 years. And then we suture that up and release the sawfish. And then all around our study area, I mean, everybody's using this technology of acoustic receivers. So pretty much in every bay and every inlet, there are these acoustic receivers moored. They kind of look like a bank tube. It sits on the bottom or attached to a channel marker or something. And depending on the environment, anytime a transmitter in the belly of something swims within a quarter mile or a mile, that receiver will record the date, time, and transmitter number. So it's kind of like your sun pass. And, in your car for sun pass, you have your transponder, and that has a unique code for you and your vehicle. That's like the transmitter we put in a Sawfish. And then the receivers that we have moored in the water are like the SunPass toll plaza. So we drive through, SunPass records the date, the time, and our transponder number. The acoustic receivers do the same thing. And so us twice a year we download our receivers in the Tampa Bay area. Some people only download theirs once a year. But we have an online cloud data sharing platform because, of course, my animals don't just swim in my receivers. I detect other people's animals on my receivers, and our sawfish will migrate down to the Keys and get detected on receivers that are down there studying other animals. So we all share our data to this cloud, and the system even emails us and says your sawfish number blah 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 was detected on these receivers, and we're able to share data that way. Those It's also expensive technology. The transmitters themselves are only like $300 to $600. Those aren't so bad. The receivers themselves, the receivers that we moor in the water, those are four, five, $6,000 depending on how many bells and whistles you want. Um, and in the Tampa Bay area, we have 50 sticks up here for the shark research projects that we're doing. So it's quite an investment. Um, but it's awesome technology, and we're able, because the transmitters last so long, we're able to get long-term movement on these animals. And that sawfish that was detected in South Carolina was with this technology. So Dean with FSU had put a transmitter in an adult sawfish in the Keys, and it was detected up in South Carolina on one of those receivers. So very cool technology. We've been doing it for maybe 7 years now. It took us a long time to get approval on our Endangered Species Act permit to do these internal transmitters on sawfish. But we were finally able to get that, and we're really starting to get some amazing information. And as we go through time, the transmitters are getting better. So on our newborn baby sawfish that are 2 feet long, when we started, those transmitters had to be so small that we'd only get like 6 months of data, and what didn't really tell us much. But now, as technology is getting better and batteries are getting smaller, we can get a few years out of the transmitters we put in the baby sawfish, and that really helps us see when they're moving from the freshwater down the estuaries, into the bays and then out into the Gulf of Mexico. So really cool technology that, we're using it on sawfish, but Hannah and them are using it on great hammers and other species, and people are using it on bonefish, tarpon, redfish, snook. So there's a lot of those receivers out in the water for us to be able to track a lot of species.
Um, awesome. Tonya, oh, I was gonna say if anyone else has any other questions, don't let me take over. You guys are welcome to ask any in the chat while we have Tonya, and we're really lucky she's up giving us an update kind of from her last talk. We actually got her in January, so it's right when at the times we just called it the Keys disease started. So I
Hmm.
was excited to have her back kind of for an update for that, knowing these animals, especially the sawfish, out of all of them, were really at risk. But Tonya does have great updates, and I have to say from personal experience, she doesn't flood your email. So I know she has her email up there. So if you guys are interested in her updates, obviously send her an email. She'll get you on their email list. And I really recommend it for anyone that's interested for you guys too. And if anyone has extra questions, definitely ask now. But Tonya, if you have any last things you want to tell our group too, we'll definitely take them. But again, thank you so much for updating us.
Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it and look forward to being in person again some other time. Yeah.
Yeah, and if anything pops up, you guys know my email at Mimi at the Scuba Club. So you guys are always welcome to email me. I'll put you in touch with Tonya as well. If you don't email her directly. And we always try to get you guys the info if you're looking for it. And Tonya, I don't see anything coming through this second,
Okay.
so you must have done great. But once again, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us. And I'm excited to maybe send you some videos if we see any this next couple
I sure hope
weeks.
so. Yep. We need
Awesome.
videos. We need pictures that we can use on our outreach materials, So yeah, anything that someone lets us use, you might see it on a billboard or on some of the swag we give away at some point.
Awesome. Yeah, Tonya has
Thank
great,
you.
like actually saying this, Tonya. I don't know if you still have them, but Tonya had the cutest sawfish earrings ever. So if anyone's interested in them, I'm sure you've seen some of us wearing them around, me or Sydney. So if anyone's interested in them, do you still have those for
I
to send
do still have
your
some.
way?
I have limited colors and hardware colors, but I still have some of, I think all of them still. Yeah.
Okay, well, if you have any pictures, we can post it on our
Okay.
Facebook group. I actually think you guys would love them. And I love just bringing awareness. It makes people ask questions when you wear stuff like that. So you can always inform people
Mhm.
with the info you have about the sawfish, keep them in kind of our
Mhm.
discussion here and in the discussion with everyone else around too. Once again, thank you guys so much. Remember, we have the Manatee Lagoon Tour and Talk. It's going to be awesome. I've heard people spotting a lot of manatees, but a lot more than that, eagle ray sharks out there. And that is going to be on Tuesday at 4:30. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Tonya.
Thanks for having me. Y'all have a good night.
Bye.